So, one of the big problems we have with graveyards is they're outside and things don't weather well. So you have things like this. Here's an old wooden headstone, and you can't find anything on it. And this really is so how well the stone holds up depends a lot on what the material used is. So originally, headstones were made of wood. Sometimes there were actually stones. And the real point of this was when you'd bury somebody, they would put things over them, the stones or wood, so that the dead wouldn't rise from the grave. And the other, probably more realistic reason was you don't want animals going and digging up their bodies. So they would put things on top of the bodies. And then they decided, you know what, well, let's mark this to commemorate who's buried here. So then they started putting names and dates and things on. And basically, really old markers, you're not going to find, very many centuries back anyway. But slate and sandstone were some things that they started to use in the mid-17th century. So these are some of the oldest stones we find are about us. Well, this country wasn't really doing this until then, but even in Europe, you're not going to find things older than that. So they use slate and sandstone. And one of the things you have to think too is they're going to use what materials they have nearby. Because if you have to dig up a rock and drag it across the country, they couldn't do that very easily in the 17th century. And you'll find in this area we have a lot of sandstone because there was sandstone. So then they started using marble in the 19th century. And then basically by the 20th century, most headstones you'll see are made of granite because granite wears really well. And they had the means to transport granite by that time. So this was the grave that kind of got me started into looking up things about gravestones. And it is a granite headstone, but it was the grave of my great-grandmother's sister. And I read this and I thought, and I knew from my grandmother that her Tanta Anna had died in childbirth. And I thought this was such a sad epitaph. It said, "She hath done what she could." And I thought, well, that was pretty fatalistic. What was her husband thinking? She did her best. And then I was going through Grandma's scrapbook, and I found this ribbon, which was a program for her funeral service. And I saw that the sermon was, "She hath done what she could." And then I realized maybe if I paid more attention in Sunday school, I would have known this. But this is actually from a Bible verse, and it's very common to see this on headstones, although I had never seen it before I saw that one. But "she hath done what she could" is actually a biblical kind of phrase, I guess, or it is from a specific Bible verse. So it's to represent a very pious woman. So this actually gives you some insight into the kind of person who this was based on the epitaph. So I read it and I thought it was kind of sad, but if I actually had known what I was thinking about, I would have known they're saying this is a pious Christian woman. And that kind of goes with what I had heard, other things I had heard about her. So then I thought, well, what else am I missing on all these headstones? So if you look, you'll find a lot of Bible verses on headstones. This one is from the book of Revelation. "Blessed are the dead which die in the Lord." And I even found this, it's actually, I think in Westlake, in German. And it's very frequently used in the funeral music of German composers, but it's the same verse. And I'm amazed how many German headstones I find right in this area. This one is, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And this one has both the relationship and the dates, and everything was in German. So, you kind of get the feeling from this that the family didn't fully embrace English. This was obviously somebody with a German background. But they had both the New Testament and the Old Testament. And this was, the memory of the dead is blessed, but the name of the wicked shall rot. Isn't that interesting? They have some kind of interesting stuff. Isn't it terrible? This one is, death shall have no dominion. So this is a Bible verse from Romans, but it's also a Dylan Thomas funeral poem. So that's a very common one. And then sometimes you get things that aren't strictly from a Bible verse, but they're still Christian. And this one is, gone home to God's loving care, or this is the promised life everlasting. So these are all Christian related. Even rest in peace is generally from a Christian standpoint. I have seen it in Jewish cemeteries, but it traditionally was only used on Christian headstones. So this is an 1842 grave. This is my 5th great grandmother. I think that's slate. And she had this long flowery thing. And you can tell this is from the Victorian era because they had all these, kind of flowery things. And they said, with fire bright did her example shine. Her love to mortals told its source divine. And while her friends her deathbed wept around, she calmly told the comfort she had found, and begged them all to praise redeeming love, answered instead, reign with Christ above. So here I'm getting, here's another Christian woman. She's probably very devout or wouldn't have had this, and spelling's not very important. So keep that in mind. But that was 1842. And actually, what I also found out was I thought, oh, wow, they made up these nice epitaphs, but you'll find these epitaphs get repeated in cemeteries all over. And so whether you're in Massachusetts or you're out in Wisconsin, you might find the same epitaphs from the same time period. This is another one that was in that same cemetery. And this is a warning about mortality. This mortal body from the grave, friends and physicians could not save, nor can the grave confine it here when Christ commands it to appear. This one I found down in Medina. It was, sweet as the memory of the dead, while sleeping in his dusty bed. His body sleeps in silence where no glimmering sun can enter there. And this one, it was kind of worn, and I was having trouble reading it, and so I Googled it, and I found it is a common epitaph. That's how I started to realize these are everywhere. So if you're having trouble reading an epitaph on an old grave, that's a good way to put in the words that you know and see if it comes up as something. But these are still done on newer graves. So here's one that is, mourn not for me, for I'm at rest. My soul is with my Savior blessed. I am from sin and sorrow free. Prepare, dear friends, to follow me. So part of this is, there's something that they call memento mori, which means remember that you have to die. So the idea is you're walking through the graveyard and the graves are kind of telling you, you may be walking around here now, but pretty soon you'll be in the ground with me. But this is the reason why, prepare to follow me, because you're not going to be walking around long. You'll be in the grave.